Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020. An election day that is just right around the corner, an upcoming decision that will be pivotal for healthcare in this industry, with two major party candidates having very drastic views on what healthcare will look like if elected to a 4-year term. So in our finale episode of season 3, we asked some doozies, like, what would a Trump re-election or a Biden election mean for your healthcare? And how could it potentially affect employee benefits for participants, employers, and partners? In an encore appearance, Chris Bird, WEX Executive Vice President of Operations, shares with the polls, policies, and even some personal predictions about the future of healthcare and what it looks like under either scenario. Yes, can't wait. My name is Eric Piella, the host of the Benefits Buzz podcast. I am joined as always by my co-host, Kelsey Burgad. Ready, set, let's get buzzed. It's the final countdown. Doo-doo-doo-doo. Doo-doo-doo-doo. That's right. It is the final countdown. We're like 43 days or so from the election, Kelsey.
Whoa. I can't even focus on the election right now because I thought we agreed you weren't going to sing on the podcast again.
Well, this, it wasn't going to last. Yeah, it wasn't going to last. The deal. We didn't handshake on it. I haven't seen you in like 6 months, so.
That's true.
It just felt like the perfect intro because it's the election is coming. I don't know if I got the exact number of days right, but as we record this, we're around between 45 days of the election. And it just wouldn't be an episode of Benefits Buzz or a season if we didn't talk about the election, especially because we know there's obviously always huge implications depending on who is the POTUS when it comes to benefits, right? So I think this is a really good, timely episode, and I apologize to all of the listeners for that horrible rendition of Final Countdown.
Apology accepted.
Thank you for accepting the apology on behalf of all of our listeners. Well, we have an awesome guest. We've got, I think, you know how Saturday Night Live has you get the 5-timer award, you get like a gold jacket if you're on the show so many times. Chris Bird, our Executive Vice President of Operations at WEX, is on the show with us. And I think it's maybe your 3rd or 4th episode. So a couple more, Chris, and you get that gold jacket. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. I'm still trying to compose myself after that musical opening there.
Yeah, I know. We all are. Apologies for that. Maybe we can cut that in post-production. We'll see.
No, we're keeping it in now. You've made your...
No, you're not so generous. No, it's not going to happen.
Well, fair enough. Well, I'm super excited about this episode. I think... anything around politics and election year, there's always a sort of just a buzz, right, in the air. Probably this year, it feels like there's a lot more than ever. Obviously, that kind of feels like it's on the line. And I think even if we just drill down specifically when it comes to, we have, 2 candidates that have different views when it comes to healthcare benefits. And so I know, your full-time role as Executive Vice President of Operations, how each job has like that, when you're interviewing on a job description, it says there's one little bullet that says other duties as assigned. I feel like for me, it's like, you might have to take out the trash, Eric, but for you, it's like, oh, Chris, you're going to have to keep track of the entire election and game plan for every possible outcome and what the ramifications will be for, the benefit space. And so you've got a really big night job in addition to this. So I'm going to start by just kind of asking you, I know you've keeping your eye on this, probably a lot of late nights, but as we enter this final stretch, right, of these presidential campaigns, how often are you seeking and consuming election news, right? Is this kind of consuming your life right now?
Well, certainly more and more often. It's something that does wax and wane, as you mentioned, but this is a very consequential election, and it's upon us, right? As you said, it's my night job. It's the other duties as assigned. It always depends on the pace of activity elsewhere in my day and in my night, but realistically, I'm spending quite a bit of time right now.
Yeah, I bet. I know we're recording this. What's the date? September 21st is the date. I think this will air in about a week or so. So again, we're 40 some days away. So I got to ask you, there's still some shifting going on, but what are give us your latest projections, Chris? I know there's been polling out there. What are you seeing right now?
Oh, you don't want my projections. I'm really bad at that. I got to be honest with you. But let's focus right now on the presidential contest. That's, I think, the one that is the people are more focused on than any other. Biden has a comfortable lead right now. Everybody reads the papers and the blogs and the news articles that are online. And the conventional wisdom would say that Joe Biden will be our next president. But let's not forget history here, right? In 2016, we learned something very important, which is anything can happen. And I want to illustrate that a little bit. So as we sit here today on the 21st, Biden has about a 6.5-point lead. And that's the average of all the polls out there. In mid-October of 2016, probably only 3.5 weeks before the election, Hillary Clinton led Donald Trump by 7 points. And so, who won the election? And the other thing to keep in mind here is that it's not as simple as just to look at the popular vote polls, if you will. It's because the popular vote doesn't matter, right? That's not how we elect a president in this country. It's the Electoral College. And so the key here is to look at the battleground states. I mean, there are states that will reliably go for Trump. There are states, and some big ones in both camps, and there are some states that will reliably go for Biden. But in the middle, you've got states like, and it's a lot of the same ones as last time around. It's Wisconsin, it's Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, Arizona, North Carolina. If you roll just those 7 states up, you got nearly 120 electoral votes. So there's a lot in the balance. If you look at the electoral map today, and if you look at state by state who's in the lead, things look really good for Joe Biden. They really do. But again, politics are really unpredictable, particularly in a year like this. We have a pandemic going on. We have a lot of unrest socially. We have a really deep recession. The pandemic not only has people kind of off their balance emotionally, but also it's going to lead to a high degree of absentee voting. And so that's going to be really, really interesting. And now, as if we didn't have enough complication, we now have a Supreme Court vacancy, and there will be a lot of disagreement and a big fight over whether or not that seat that has been vacated by Ruth Bader Ginsburg should be filled before the end of the current presidential term. So, stay tuned.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was definitely one of those individuals who thought, back in 2016, like I knew what was going to happen. I watched the news. I saw what the polls looked like. And then, election day came and went, and I was wrong. And so I think a lot of people were in that same position where they thought the same thing. So, President Trump is the incumbent. He's been in the office for 4 years. Can you outline what an additional 4 years would look like under a Trump presidency from a healthcare perspective?
Well, certainly with respect to the issues that we track most closely, and those are issues around consumer-directed health in COBRA, there won't be any substantive changes. I mean, I like to say that we've seen this movie before, and it's the second installment in the series. The last 3.5 years have shown us that the Trump administration is a big, big supporter of choice, and that's choice for insurers, for employers, and for employees and consumers, healthcare consumers. And in particular, President Trump has been a very big supporter of health savings accounts. So we would expect that to continue in a second Trump term.
So has he taken any positions, during the campaign that would suggest, I don't know, any sort of pivot, from his first 4 years, or is that, or again, do you kind of see, again, we always ask you to do this, but look in your crystal ball, is there anything that's kind of coming down the pipeline that maybe he was building towards that he would now have more time to do if he was reelected?
Well, I think the one, and I guess it's indirectly one that would be important, particularly to consumers. It doesn't directly affect consumer-directed health and our business, but that's drug pricing. And that's something that Donald Trump campaigned on in 2016. It's really, really hard to wrestle that one to the ground. But you probably saw that just a couple of weeks ago, the president issued an executive order And it is a framework under which he would attempt to get drug prices under control. And certainly, if he were reelected, I think he would make that a cornerstone of his health initiatives right out of the gate.
So on the flip side of the coin, what about former Vice President Biden? What is his stance on healthcare?
Well, it's perhaps a little bit in flux, right? He campaigned as a moderate, and his focus was first and foremost on improving the Affordable Care Act. He was against a Medicare for all solution on scrapping the entire system, the way some of the more progressive candidates were back when we were in the primary campaigns. So I think the focus here would first and foremost be, hey, the Affordable Care Act works. Let's improve on it. One of the improvements that we know that President Biden would be very interested in pursuing is higher amounts of subsidies and more broadly available to more people on the Affordable Care Act exchanges. But the second thing that a Biden presidency would no doubt take a real run at would be a public option. So as opposed to Medicare for all or a single payer system, just set up a public plan and let it compete with the private insurers for people's business. It would be run by Medicare. It would be available on any of the public ACA exchanges. And people would be able to opt out of their employer plan for any reason in order to go onto a public exchange and buy that public option.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think one of the big, assumptions has to be made, and maybe you know what they say of assumptions, but there's this whole Bernie Sanders base that is now looking to Biden, potentially as their candidate. And so do you think that base and those voters has influenced or will influence Biden's policy in any of this movement towards universal health care?
That's the big question, and it's one that consumes a lot of sort of virtual cocktail party chatter, if you will, which Joe Biden would actually govern if he were elected. I think we can get a little bit of a view into that. And to answer the question directly, Eric, I do believe Bernie has pulled Joe a little bit to the left here, right? So there was a Biden-Sanders unity agenda that was published, probably 5, 6, 7 weeks ago at this point. And it's a very ambitious document. And it not only deals with healthcare, it deals with everything else, right? Climate, immigration, racial justice, and everything in between. That unity agenda stopped short of universal health care. But the public option that was designed in that unity agenda or that framework is a very, very high in its aspirations. So the plan designs would be relatively generous, or at least one of them would be the subsidy levels available to people to help them pay the premiums would be higher than they are today, right? And so if you just look at that and say, hey, if that became an option, the bet might be that significant numbers of people might migrate out of the employer plans and into that public plan because it's so much cheaper. But there's this little thing called budget deficits, right? And those could get in the way. We've been spending a lot of money this year, and we've got a level of public debt that's astronomical as a result of all the things we've done to help people with the pandemic. And so any public option that would be debated and might pass next year might end up being considerably less generous than what Biden and Sanders would hope, just simply out of economic reality. And then the other thing is when you start to think about the public option and whether or not people might opt for that plan is, will the providers play? Will my doctor or will your OBGYN or will the kid's pediatrician be in the network? Because if they aren't, no matter how much more attractive that plan is, you may not go there.
Yeah, that's that's the big question too, right? Will they play? I guess that's wait to be seen, and guess a lot will have to fall in place and for that to be an issue or to be something to look at. And gosh, forgive me, I feel like the Democratic campaigns were forever ago because I don't remember because obviously as a vice president, Kamala Harris is a running mate, and I don't remember what her stance was on healthcare, but I bet you do. So I'd love for you to kind of share anything that stood out to you with Biden choosing Harris as a running mate and her perspective on healthcare that you think might pop up.
Yeah, Eric, the interesting thing about Kamala Harris was that she actually dropped out of the primary campaigns relatively early in the process. And it is kind of funny. You are making me remember now that, the campaign was going on and there were 5 or 6 really viable candidates. And then all of a sudden, 2 things happened and they kind of collided at the same time. The pandemic began to emerge. And also, all of a sudden, Joe Biden won South Carolina and the entire establishment got behind him and just swept everybody else aside, including Bernie Sanders. But Harris wasn't really in the campaign long enough for people to understand where she stood on the issues. With respect to healthcare, it's interesting, very early in the campaign, she endorsed a single-payer Medicare for all concept. And relatively quickly after, she ended up walking that back, and she kind of got back into what you would consider the more moderate camp of, okay, but let's have a public option, right? She certainly on healthcare matters is not nearly as progressive based on what we've seen as, say, an Elizabeth Warren would have been, or a Bernie Sanders. And I don't think she was chosen by Biden to be a running mate based on her healthcare policy position. So I doubt it makes much difference one way or another. I don't think she'll have that much influence.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, just like anything in today's world, I guess only time will tell what will happen out of all of the election and the pandemic and all of that. But, before we run out of time with you here, Chris, I would love to hear what the Senate and House races look like and how that might affect healthcare.
Yeah, Kelsey, that's probably actually the most important question, right? The House in almost any event is going to remain Democrat. I will make that bold prediction. It's not a very bold prediction at all. But the Senate really hangs in the balance, right? It's 53-47 today. But if you look at the swing states where there are closely contested races that could go either way, there are a lot more Republicans in that middle column than there are Democrats fighting for reelection. And so, depending on what polling you look at on a state-by-state basis, it's a dead heat whether or not the Republicans retain control or whether the Democrats control. And don't forget, if it's 50-50, then it matters who's in the White House because the vice president breaks the ties. It's a lot easier to affect meaningful change for a President Biden if the Democrats have the Senate than if the Republicans do. And so even if Biden gets elected, there's probably more in play based on what happens in the Senate than there is perhaps even in the White House.
Absolutely. I think that's why it's so important to pay attention to the whole picture. I know we all spend a lot of time thinking about the presidential race, but we can't forget about the Senate and the House as well, because it does make a difference. So that's really insightful. Thank you. One last question that I have is just really digging into the products that we offer. So the popular employee benefits like a health savings account or a flexible spending account. What would either presidency mean for the future of those benefits?
Yeah, I'll start with Biden, the change one, and he's likely neutral on health savings accounts. He's probably not a huge, let's go out and push them, but he understands that there are tens of millions of people who have them. A lot of them are Democrats, and they love them, right? But one thing that we need to keep our eye on is if there is a public option and if people migrate out of employer plans to that public option, as an industry, we've been doing a lot of work to make sure that health savings accounts can coexist with that public option plan. And there are a couple of particular initiatives. One would allow anybody on Medicare to have a health savings account. The other would have anyone with health insurance, regardless of what it looked like, to have a health savings account. And both of those would position HSAs in particular very favorably so that the industry would really be agnostic as to who the payer is. Trump, as I said before, he's a big supporter of health savings accounts. But there is this proposal out there that I just mentioned. We call it HSA decoupling. We did a podcast on it a couple of weeks ago that says, hey, anybody can have an HSA as long as they have health insurance. Under a second Trump administration, you would likely see that proposal march forward. Whether it gets done or not is another question. But if it did, then that would likely lead to a dramatic decrease in the number of flexible spending accounts, and perhaps they would more or less sunset as a product.
Well, I can't thank you enough. I love this. This is so interesting, and I appreciate your thoughts because I know you've done the work, the research, and we're appreciative that we get to learn from you. And I know our listeners appreciate your perspectives. If anything, just to kind of summarize where everything's at and kind of think through what the possible scenarios could be, I think it's all good for us to kind of understand what could be coming down the pipe and how that might affect, benefits and administration and, how our employees, our listeners are thinking, what options our employees might have. So I can't thank you enough. Now, we kind of have a tradition on the Benefits Buzz podcast where we ask our guests, to provide, our audience with kind of a takeaway or a leave behind or something. And in this case, it has to be probably, rock the vote. Get out there and vote, people. So please do that. But is there anything else, Chris, that I don't know, you would suggest that our audience, specifically when it comes to like kind of HR and benefit professionals, pay special attention to, or, as this election approaches?
I'm just relieved when you said a tradition. I thought you were going to say the guest has to sing.
You have to sing.
You won that, man.
Take us out with the song, Chris.
Seriously, I would say just be ready for anything. Don't expect any one thing or series of things to happen. Just be ready for anything. It's really fluid time right now. Change could come. Meaningful change could come. But if it does, that's okay. I mean, we've been here before. I'm old and wise enough, I guess, to have said, hey, I was here in 2009 when the Affordable Care Act was being debated, and employers, insurers, brokers, and consumers came through that very, very well. And we did really, really well. So no matter what happens, I think we're prepared.
Awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough, Chris, for coming on the show. If I was to look into my crystal ball, I've asked you to look into your crystal ball. If I was to look into my crystal ball, I definitely know we wrap up season 3 Benefits Buzz here, middle of October. So we won't have campaign, election results until season 4. But if there is certainly a change, a big change, I know that you will be a guest in that one more appearance to get towards that gold jacket, Chris, for us. So you've been a wonderful guest, continue to be so, and potentially we look forward to have you on the podcast in the episodes to come. So thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
WEX is in the business of simplifying benefits for everyone. Now, although we certainly hope our podcast sparks some aha moments, like that was pretty cool, but of course we cannot provide legal, investment, or financial advice. And, therefore, nothing shared in this podcast should be interpreted as such. We encourage you to seek out appropriate professional advice regarding your plans. Hey, congratulations! You made it through our disclaimer. Thanks for listening.